Hello everyone and welcome back to another review in my channel, this time for Donkey Kong Land, developed by Rare and released in June of 1995 to follow up the enormous success of Donkey Kong Country for the Super Nintendo, released in 1994, which, as some of you may know, that's one of my favorite games of all time. So yeah, of course, if you follow my channel, you'll know that I'm also a huge fan of the trilogy, the original trilogy for the Super Nintendo. So it's a bit surprising that I never actually played any of the Land games for the Game Boy system. But now, as an adult, I guess it's time to rectify this situation. So the plan is to slowly play the Donkey Kong Land trilogy for the Game Boy in order to experience what these games had to offer back then. So right off the bat, I have to say that I love the story setup of this game. There are no intro cinematics that explain the story, or quote-unquote story, of the game, but you rather have to refer to the instruction manual to learn about the story and objective of this game. Yeah, the good old days where instruction manuals had a really good use besides just showing you the controls and things like that. So the story takes place directly after the ending of Donkey Kong Country for the Super Nintendo, where Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong and I guess Cranky Kong are shown just kind of like discussing the adventure of that game. And out of jealousy, Cranky Kong says that, you know, the only reason why the first game was successful was because of the great graphics and sound that the game produced. But Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong are irritated by this I guess accusation or statement done by Cranky, and you know, they try to convince him that it's just not about the graphics and sound, that the game was actually good. So they set up some sort of challenge where Cranky Kong challenges them to replicate the success of their previous game, and this is how the game starts, which is a pretty interesting situation that I just love the fact that I love the setup, I guess, of where the game is in a way makes fun of being the game itself makes fun of being a video game, and its characters and its own characters acknowledge that they are part of a video game. There were some instances in the Super Nintendo Donkey Kong game where this also takes place, a few dialogues here and there with Cranky, actually, when you meet him in his hut. So I remember loving these moments and how unique they were at the time, just them admitting they're part of a video game. It was a really cool thing back then. So the story setup of this game I absolutely loved, and just brought back memories of the first game and how cool it was, to have that concept in games back then. Now, in terms of graphics, this game looks surprisingly good considering the limitations of the Game Boy hardware. The game falls very short when compared to its console big brother, but that's to be expected due to the difference in power between the systems. The size of the Game Boy screen is not helpful either, which caused me some problems, especially when you're trying to play in a faster than normal pace within the different levels across the game. The setting and art direction are very similar to the Super Nintendo game, showcasing levels that are, for example, jungle themed, or levels that have snow in them. Some of the temples and caves backgrounds, also water levels, are present in this game. So, but at the same time, props to Rare for including new settings that include a dreamlike setting in the clouds, and a personal favorite of mine, which is Big Ape City, the last world in this game, which represents an urban setting, which I would have loved to see in the console game with the graphics power of the Super Nintendo. The urban / metropolis setting goes very well with the Donkey Kong nature of the game, considering the original arcade game also had an urban setting with the construction side and the beams and scaffolds and things like that. So I would have, killed to see a more detailed version of this world and levels in the console versions of the game. It's a true shame that they never materialized this city / urban setting in any of the console games. Now, in terms of performance, there are some limitations, obviously. The game does not run as smoothly as the console counterpart. One really annoying issue I had was that the game has limited off-screen memory, meaning that if you happen to fall down from one screen to another, and you know that the screen below has some sort of platform where that will save you from dying, basically, the game automatically kills you, since it's not able to process the screen fast enough. So needless to say, there were a lot of unnecessary deaths on my playthrough in areas where I knew there was a platform beneath me, but the game was not able to process that separate screen fast enough. So that's a little bit of an annoying issue that I had with this game. Now, sound-wise, the game is also limited, but does have basic tunes that resemble the console version, as well as sound effects that are, back from the console version of the game. Gameplay-wise, the game plays very similarly to the Super Nintendo game in the sense that you have a run and jump button configuration, which admittedly is a little bit weird since the Game Boy only has two buttons, two face buttons, if you want to call them that. And you can't hold the Y button while hitting the B button to jump type of combo that I'm incredibly used to when playing Super Nintendo platformers. The configuration of the Game Boy, the two buttons are next to each other in a horizontal fashion, so it was very hard to duplicate that run and jump combo or configuration that the Super Nintendo is able to offer with platforming games. Now, other components that are back in this games include the use of animal buddies such as Rambi the Rhino and things like that. You also have bananas that you collect to gain lives. Every 100 bananas you get an extra life. And of course, the use of barrels and things like ropes to complement the platforming sections of the game. You can only see one character on the screen at a time, but you can switch between Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong. Those are the two playable characters in this game. You can switch between them with the select button, and they have similar properties where Diddy is a little bit faster, more nimble, and Donkey is slower, but he can jump over like heavy armored enemies and still be able to defeat them. One interesting feature for this game is that collecting the K-O-N-G, the Kong letters, is very important since it allows you to save the game at the end of that level. So instead of providing an extra life to the player like in other Donkey Kong games in the past. So you could in theory save after every single stage as long as you collect the letters, which is something that forced me to look for them more than in the regular Donkey Kong Country games, since it's very important to be able to save the game right after each level, because if you run out of lives, the last thing you want to do is repeat the levels over and over again. And just like I did with Super Mario Land, which I reviewed previously, I was not using save states during my run through of this game. I was playing the game in its natural way, if you will, so being able to save after each level was definitely a plus, just to secure my progress throughout the game. Now, Donkey Kong Land also introduces some new enemies, such as flying pigs. Yes, you heard that right, there are flying pigs in this game. And some new cool looking bosses, actually, that fortunately they look really cool, and they are new compared to the previous game, but unfortunately they are on the simpler side when it comes to the combat. They're very basic to defeat and whatnot, so that was a little bit disappointing in terms of the new bosses in the game. As mentioned previously, there are some new themes for levels, but unfortunately this game doesn't have the same speed and flow of its console counterpart, which is again expected due to the limitations of the hardware, but worth noting at any rate. They also try to introduce some new gameplay concepts, such as a dream level with automatic moving platforms that change directions every time you jump. But these levels became very annoying and are very slow to unwind. So, I guess props to Rare for trying to introduce new platforming level variety, but at the same time, the levels were just a little bit slow and cumbersome to go through. The game is sized appropriately for being a handheld game, offering about 34 levels across 4 different worlds. The game can be completed in under 5 hours pretty easily if you know what you're doing. Just remember that the focus is getting those Kong letters in as many levels as possible in order to save and avoid repeating levels if you run out of lives. Some of the hitboxes and platforms, the platform limits themselves also felt a little bit off, due to the pre-rendered backgrounds that are available in the game. I guess the developers or the programming just was not up to pinpoint accuracy, it was a little bit frustrating, especially since this is a platforming game, and I found myself falling off some of the edges prematurely, which is not good. However, I think the overall experience is that this game, experiencing this game for the first time, I think I learned to appreciate this game for what it is and for what it represented at the time. It was an enjoyable experience, and I look forward to trying the other Land games eventually, and of course, providing my impressions like I'd always do. So with that being said, thank you all for watching this video, and I will see you all later. Take it easy.